The power of change. Learning to live as a weirdo. Have you got your phone on you right now? How do you unlock your phone? You might use a fingerprint like I do, or Face ID. You've probably got your wallet to hand as well. And there are things that identify you in that as well. Bank cards or loyalty cards. Maybe a driver's license with a picture of you doing this. It's funny the things that identify us. One of the things I have is this. It's a sunflower lanyard, and it indicates to people that I have a hidden disability. That's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. My name is Rachel Morgan Trimmer, and my company is called Sparkle Class. I'm a neurodiversity coach and consultant, and that means I help people with conditions like ADHD, autism, and dyslexia with their life and work and career goals. So that might be setting up a business or working out what you want to do in life or something like that. And I also help companies be more inclusive to neurodiverse people. I'm telling you my story today from how I went from being a confused youngster to a depressed adult to where I am now. Before I started doing this talk, I'd never told my story before. So why am I doing it now? Well, I'm going to come back to that at the end. First though, I want to do my quiz. I've got a little quiz running through this, and I'm going to give you the answers at the end. So you can write them down or not as you choose. Question 1, what is the name of my company? What is the name of my company? I've just told you, so I hope you can remember. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my conditions. First one is autism, and everybody thinks the autistic spectrum looks like this. So you've got normal over here, a bit autistic in the middle, and over there you've got Rain Man. When the film Rain Man came out was actually the first time I'd heard the word autistic. But I didn't think I was autistic because I was nothing like Dustin Hoffman's character in that film. He won an Oscar for that. Did you know that? And I thought that was a bit of a swizz because to play a stereotypical autistic, he didn't have that many lines and you only need one facial expression. So it's perhaps something for Nicole Kidman to think about for her next role. The autistic spectrum actually looks more like this. Some of the things you might find on it: good at maths, very common, obsessive interests, rigid thinking, rigid behaviour, crap social skills, weird about being touched, non-verbal, and some things have moved there. So ADHD's come in, messing up the spectrum a bit. I've got ADHD, so although I'm good at maths, you can't really tell. And obsessive interests has suddenly moved off. Pretending everything is fine is one way people cover up crap social skills. Non-verbal, that can be by choice or not by choice. Obsessive interest suddenly got bigger there. I personally like Hello Kitty, but for me, I wouldn't call it an obsession, so it exists outside the spectrum for me. Gastrointestinal issues, that can be a cause of some of that rigid thinking and behaviour, or it could be nothing to do with that and just be a coexisting condition with autism. About 95% of people with autism have at least one coexisting condition. Depression quite often runs through it as well. ADHD can lead to depression, and depression can lead to some of those gastrointestinal issues as well. It also means that you need to be touched, but of course you're weird about being touched unless it's someone on a very specific list that only makes sense to you. Anxieties come in there, the font is too small and it's the wrong colour for some reason. That leads to coping strategies, and depression leads to coping strategies, and ADHD leads to coping strategies. And suddenly pretending everything is fine isn't really working anymore, so you start drinking, and that leads to more depression, and there's a completely irrelevant banana. So you can see, it's messy. There's a lot going on, and you can tell by that it's hard to diagnose not only autism, but anything at all. This is what ADHD looks like. Not taking your shirt off and slumping in front of the telly, but if that's what you want to do, I'm not judging. ADHD is like having all those TVs on at the same time. So trying to focus on one is virtually impossible. And so some of those TV distractions might be things in the real world, like something that's going on outside or a noise you can hear, or it might be internal things. So it might be, one of them might be playing Baby Shark on a loop. One of them might keep asking you how old Nicolas Cage is. One of them might be telling you that there's something you were supposed to do, but it can't quite remember what. And one of them is listing all your failures from 1992 until the present day. Now, it is possible, if one of those TVs has something incredibly interesting on it, we are able to hyperfocus, but we can't do it on command. So when people say, why can't you do the thing? Why can't you focus? Why can't you just be like everybody else? We don't have a remote to turn off all those other tools. Other TVs, sorry. We literally don't have the tools that we need to act like everybody else. So here are some things people said to me when I was a kid, when I was at school. Clever was one of them. I'm academically gifted. In some ways that's good, but in others it just means you remain undiagnosed for longer, because being clever enables you to cope and to cover up as well. Lazy, very common in people with ADHD. Too sensitive, that's very common with people with both autism and ADHD. I was called insensitive as well. I don't know how you can be too sensitive and insensitive at the same time, but there you go. Must try harder. Okay, but how? Tortoise trimmer. One of my teachers had, she encouraged us all to give each other rather cruel nicknames. And mine was Tortoise Trimmer because it took me ages to do everything because of my ADHD. I sat next to Can't Do It Crooks, and he ended up going to prison for GBH, so it turned out there was something he could do after all. And finally, of course, there's Weirdo. So like a lot of autistic kids, I was bullied. I didn't understand I was different. I didn't understand, why that other people didn't think the same way that I did, so I got bullied. And this graph shows you the percentage of autistic kids who get bullied, which is about 75, much more than the percentage of all kids who get bullied. And in fact, ADHD kids are also more likely to be bullied, but they're also more likely to be the bully as well. Got another quiz question now. Question 2. What bubble burst in 2000? What bubble burst in 2000? So I'd like to just cover the difference between neurodiversity and mental illness, because it's something that many people don't really understand. That's me as a toddler. I don't know why I'm dressed as Iggle Piggle. But this is showing you that having a neurodevelopmental disorder is a little bit like having a toddler brain. And people don't like to say this, but that's exactly what it is. Part of your brain stops developing past a certain point. And it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's something that you're born with. You don't grow out of it. And some, even medical professionals will perpetuate this myth. You don't grow out of it. You learn to cope with it. So it doesn't display as much as it did when you were a toddler, but you do not grow out of it. And everybody's experience is different and can fluctuate. In fact, I'll show you mine with this handy little graph. So my ADHD it's always there. It's always the same amount. Sometimes it feels worse or it looks worse because of other things that are going on. And my autism's the same. I'm always the same amount autistic, although some days I feel more autistic than on others. But here's my mentalness. That's something that fluctuates, goes up and down a lot, and mental illness can also go away. And there's another factor which influences all these things as well. And that is all the other crap I've got going on in my life. So you can see, although those things, the ADHD and the autism stay the same, there's a lot of different factors that affect them. Speaking of mental health, or mental illness rather, I'd like to tell you a bit about mine. I was depressed for most of my life. I had depression and anxiety and a number of coexisting conditions as well. I was depressed from the age of 6. And when I was 14, I was put into a mental hospital. And I was diagnosed then as well. And do you know what? It wasn't actually that bad. It wasn't as bad as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And it was obviously full of crazy people. Sorry, you're not supposed to call them that, are you? It was full of psychiatrists. But apart from them, it was all right. You know, the kids were okay, and I learnt how to set fire to stuff. So, you know, life skills. And I'm not alone in this. Autistic people are 9 times more likely to die by suicide, and they are 28 times more likely to attempt it. That's a picture of me on a stag do. This was taken a few months ago. It's the most civilised stag do I've ever been on. We went to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. I'm the best woman, and that man with me is the groom. That's my friend Chris. I met Chris through a drama group. Here's a picture of us when we took a production to the Edinburgh Festival. You can see Chris over there on the left, and there's me in the middle. Chris and I were both very heavily involved in the drama group. He acted in every play that they put on, and I was mainly involved backstage. I did stage management and set painting, and we joined it around the same time. And we both joined the committee as well, and we'd help out with publicity, going around Leeds City Centre on a Saturday, giving out leaflets to our plays and so on. And when we'd both been there for about a year, there was a Christmas party. And it was a very big group, so you wouldn't bring a Christmas card for everybody in the group. That would be too many. You would just bring them for your friends or people you'd done a lot of plays with, maybe even somebody who'd helped you out. And because it was a busy party, to save you handing the cards out at the party, there was a table at the entrance, and you would put your cards out on the table. Everybody had their own pile, and then that person could take their pile of cards home at the end of the evening. So I got to the party with my little stack of cards, and I saw the table, so I started handing them out, and I saw Chris's pile, so I put my card for him on his pile. And as I was doing this, my friend came up to me, next to me, and started doing the same thing. So she started putting the cards out, and she came to one that she had for me. And she said, "Where's your pile?" And I looked at the table, and I said, "I haven't got a pile." And I tried to justify it to myself by saying, well, you know, maybe I hadn't been there long enough, but I'd actually been there a little bit longer than Chris, and he had a pile. And then I said to myself, well, maybe I haven't been involved in enough things, but I knew that wasn't true either, because I was involved in everything. It's such a little thing, isn't it? A Christmas card. And yet, when we don't get one, it feels so much bigger. All of us, I think, have had an experience like that. Not being invited, not included, not wanted. But when you're autistic, those things happen over and over and over again. Between jobs and seeing various mental health professionals, I lived abroad and I travelled the world. That is a picture of me in front of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. That man who is with me flew out to Australia to take me to the Sydney Opera House on my 30th birthday. So I married him and had his children. Not at the Sydney Opera House, that was something that happened later. Also, when I was 30, I set up my own business. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot we've got a question first. Question 3 in my quiz. In which direction can you not pass the ball in rugby? In which direction can you not pass the ball in rugby? So, where was I? Oh, yes, I set up my own business. I thought I was going to look like that and my office was going to look like that, but actually I was just a fat git in a cupboard under the stairs. It was about the same time, coincidentally, that I thought I might be autistic and have ADHD as well. And And being an entrepreneur is actually great for neurodiverse people in a lot of ways, because we're more productive, we learn faster, and for those of us with mental health issues, the autonomy and flexibility can be really, really helpful. But there was a conflict, because I was trying to run my business the same way that everybody else did. I was getting advice from neurotypical people, and it just didn't work for me. I couldn't do things the same way as everybody else, and so I got very mentally ill at that time. I didn't have the tools to cope with my neurodiversity or my mental illness. It's like trying to open a box when the crowbar is inside it. And I didn't get help either, because I was too scared. I wasn't being treated the way that I needed to be treated, and I wasn't treating myself the way that I needed to be treated either, because I didn't know how to. How should you treat autistics? Let's have a look. So, number 1, fairly obvious, don't make eye contact. 2, do not touch them. 3, some have food issues, so don't offer food. 4, if you see one, stand still until it moves away. And finally, tell a park ranger. I'm sorry, that's the wrong slide. That's not how you treat autistics, that's how you treat bears. Really, how should you treat autistics? Well, with respect would be a good start. And do you know what? Some of the people who are supposed to be helping us are really bad at this. I saw a thing for a conference recently, and one of the speakers was autistic, and his bio thing, it was really patronising, because it said even though he's autistic, he managed to get an education, and now he's a conference speaker, and he travels independently. Of course he travels independently. He's autistic. He's probably memorised the entire rail map of Great Britain. So yes, not everyone is able to treat us the way we need to be treated. So back to my story. I waited a long time for diagnosis, and I kept getting brushed off, because I'm female. Females are much less likely to be diagnosed with autism or ADHD than men, partly because we mask better, we fit in better, we develop these coping strategies that allows it to go undiagnosed. And I've got my own pet theory about this as well. I think one of the reasons women don't get diagnosed with autism is because our special interests are productive. Now, when I was looking at the criteria for autism, I was thinking, well, I don't really have a special interest. And then I remembered food. I'm obsessed with food. This is a cake I made for my kids last Christmas. And no one ever says to me, please, stop making cakes, stop making tasty food, stop feeding me. And it's the same with knitting as well, isn't it? There's no such thing as too much knitting. So if you are a stereotypical autistic male, your interests might be train spotting. It's a classic, or collecting action figures or something. Fine, do what you want to do, but it doesn't actually help anyone else. And my theory is that one reason women aren't diagnosed is because our special interests are productive, and therefore they're not seen as a problem. Question 4 on my quiz. Who is the lead guitarist in Guns N' Roses? Who is the lead guitarist in Guns N' Roses? So, this was my route to ADHD diagnosis. As you can tell from this metaphorical picture, it didn't actually go anywhere. I was never diagnosed by a medical professional, but I was identified as having ADHD by an ADHD coach in my first session. As soon as we started talking, she was like, yep, you've got ADHD. And what I've realised after accepting it in myself is that once you can recognise it in yourself, you can start to recognise it in other people as well. As for my autism diagnosis, I'm still on the waiting list. My last therapist he referred me to the special autism people, and he said there is no doubt in his mind that I am autistic, but I just need that sort of special, I don't know if it's a certificate or whatever, that you get with an official diagnosis, and that's not for me. It is to compel other people to treat me in the way that I need to be treated. That is to adapt it to my needs and my, my special sort of sensitivities, I suppose. The diagnosis thing is quite an interesting question. I get a lot of people saying to me, should I get a diagnosis? And it's up to them. But what I found when people have that diagnosis, it allows them to take away some of those labels that have been put on them and some of that identity, and understand that it's not their fault. And so they can say to themselves, I'm not lazy, I'm not self-indulgent, I'm not unlikable, and most of all, I'm not broken. And there's an example of how we can start to change some of those labels. This is a still from Monty Python's 4 Yorkshiremen sketch, in which they're all trying to outdo each other with how deprived their childhoods were. And I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I do tend to get a little bit 4 Yorkshiremen about the whole late diagnosis thing. So somebody will say, oh, I was diagnosed really late. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28. And I'll be like, oof, I used to dream of being diagnosed in my 20s. And it's the same thing with mental health, isn't it? Where, somebody said to me, their last bout of depression had lasted 6 months and mine had lasted 3 years. So I was like, yay, I win. But of course I don't win. Nobody wins. And I do have to remind myself that it's not a competition. And that sort of attitude, it doesn't help me. And it certainly doesn't help you. So what can you do to help your favourite neurodivergent? Well, the usual advice is good. It's, adapt to our needs, understand that we don't see the world the same way that you do. Try and make things accessible to us and include us as well. And I'd go further than that. I'd say challenge us, celebrate us, use us, not in the same way that my ex-boyfriend used me, but I mean, help us find out what we're good at and ask us to do those things that we're good at, because it helps give us confidence. And I know some people don't think they're good at anything, and I know that's not true. I used to teach underprivileged kids both in Leeds and in New York, and to be perfectly honest, some of those kids were a real pain in the bum, and some of those kids were thick as thistles, but every single one brought something positive and unique to my classes that nobody else could do. And that goes for you too, not the thick as thistles bit. I mean, whatever you are and whatever you're doing, you're bringing something unique, something that no one else can bring to whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, and whoever you're with. But how can we start to see our differences as strengths and start to celebrate them? Here's one way. We can turn them on their heads. So, for example, if somebody says to you, you're a daydreamer, you've always got your head in the clouds, that means you're creative, you're imaginative. And what if somebody tells you that you're boring? Well, apart from that just being, very subjective, being boring can be a good thing if somebody needs your help with their tax return. So we start to look at those things, those labels, that identity we've been given, and start turning them around and seeing for their strengths. I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for being a weirdo. I couldn't help people without knowing that everything we do needs to be tailored for your needs, to see beyond those labels and to understand that you're a unique person with unique needs. And honestly, it's incredibly rewarding for me now to be able to use the experience that I went through, so it's not wasted, and I can share everything that I've learned with other people now. This is the last question in my quiz. Question 5. Which word completes all these film titles? Which word completes all these film titles? We've got something window, something garden, and on Her Majesty's something service. I said at the beginning I would tell you why I'm telling my story now. And it's because of 3 people, and they're represented here. The first one for which I've used a picture of Sigmund Freud, was my therapist. He told me to open up, talk about my feelings, talk about my experience, connect with others. He didn't actually mean like tell hundreds of strangers, but here we are. There's a plot twist here actually in my story. After my last lot of therapy with my very good therapist, my mental health got better and I'm not depressed anymore. My life absolutely does not look like that. It would if this was a film, but it's not, it's real life. I still have the legacy of everything I went through. And like you, I get stressed sometimes, I get worried, I get down. But the difference is it's not with me all the time anymore. I don't have that cloud hanging over me. I can cope, and if I need help now, I will reach out for it. This is the second person who is the reason that I'm telling my story now. It's a stranger. It was actually a stranger who suggested this to me. It wasn't some bloke I met at the bus stop. It was actually in a public speaking workshop where we were developing the abstracts for our talks. And I think a lot of us have had that experience where it's taken a stranger to have that insight about us because they're not seeing those labels and that identity that other people have created for us. They come with no preconceptions, and that's why occasionally they can have that insight and make a suggestion to you or give you an idea that you can take forward. And the last person who is the reason for me telling my story now is you. You are represented here by Gillian Anderson because I am assuming that you are that beautiful. And the reason I want to tell you my story is because I want to be a page in somebody else's survival guide. I want to help you understand that you don't have to live within those limits that other people impose on you. And when we're making changes, we talk about going outside our comfort zone. And people imagine the boundaries of the comfort zone to be something like this. So to get outside your comfort zone, it's a big deal. It's a challenge. You have to psych yourself up for it to get over that fence. And it's a big deal. It's difficult. It's going to hurt maybe, and you're going to rip your trousers on the top of that fence. But that's not actually what the boundaries of your comfort zone look like. They look more like this, the barriers you get at events. So to expand your comfort zone, you don't actually have to make this big change or do anything particularly difficult. You just shift those barriers slowly and gradually until your comfort zone is bigger. Being normal turned out to be a bit of a challenge because I'd never done it. So people say, be yourself. And because I've been mentally ill for so long, I didn't know who that was. And I said so to my therapist just before I was discharged. And he said, well, one way of doing that is to live according to your values. And by doing that, you can be authentic. So I know that I'm never going to be normal, which is fine. And I will not live what most people would consider to be a normal life. But I can be authentic. I'd like to leave you with this thought. Labels can be useful. These are all things that people have said about me. They're useful for categorizing and identifying people, but they're limiting. They never tell the full story about you, and some of them can be wrong. They don't describe the whole person. And the best thing about labels is you can take them off. So here are the answers to my quiz. My company is called Sparkle Class. The bubble that burst in 2000 was the .com bubble. The direction you can't pass the ball in rugby is forward. The guitarist from Guns N' Roses is Slash, and the missing word from all of those films is secret. If you put all those together, you get this website address, sparkleclass.com/secret. And if you go there, you will find your prize. You can also connect with me on Twitter. I'm @SparkleClass. And please do connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Rachel Morgan Trimmer.